I have a fear of painting big models, and I want to get over that fear, and I want you to get over that fear too. So today I'm working on the biggest, most centerpieciest model of my Warriors of Chaos project. So this is my undivided Chaos Lord in charge of my entire army, Valkadi Kol. I showed her off before in my Warriors of Chaos army showcase video. At that point she was only partly modeled. In fact, I started kitbashing her about 2 years ago, but I've never painted anything this big before, so I kind of stalled and she'd just been kind of sitting around this whole time. But A Brush with Death Miniatures over on Instagram came out with another of his hobby competitions, and this time the theme was dragons. So I took that as a sign that it was time to face my fear and just do it. I don't have any footage of the actual modeling process, but I'll give you a quick breakdown before we start painting. Obviously, her dragon is based on Archaon's mount, Dorgar, from the Age of Sigmar. I don't really like Dorgar's cartoony heads, and plus, this is supposed to be a different dragon anyway, so I gave it 2 heads instead. It's kind of a nod to the old 2-headed Chaos Dragons. These ones came from the Orc Krulboy's Sludgeraker beast. It comes with 2 heads in the box, so I used both. There was a big gap between the heads and the saddle, so I put a giant horn there so that she could nail trophies of war to it and show everyone who's really the big man in the army. Moving up to Valkadi herself, her legs are from the Skullcrushers kit, and the torso comes from that new Lord on Demonic Mount. I built the generic Lord, so these are the leftover Eternus bits. Her head, I think, is possibly from Sisters of Battle, and her hair comes from maybe Dark Eldar or maybe Necromunda. Again, I can't really remember. Leave a comment if you recognize it. Before I could start on painting, I had to come up with a base. I built it around this rocky outcropping from the Kragnos kit, and while I work on this, let me quickly summarize her background. So she's from the Kol tribe of the Kurgan people, hence Valkadi Kol. One day she saw a star fall way off in the northern horizon, and being the 3rd child, living in the shadow of her dumb meathead brothers, she knew this was her best chance at glory. So she swore an oath to travel to the lands of the gods and bring back that fallen star to her people. I'll skip a lot of the details, but suffice to say, traveling to the Chaos Wastes is a journey that changes a person. After all the long months and miles of fighting her way through marauders, champions, and nightmarish creatures of legend, she'd become an aspiring champion herself. When she finally found the crater left by the fallen Warpstone meteor, a dragon had already claimed it as its treasure, and a band of Tong tribe marauders had set up a settlement around the crater, worshipping the dragon as a god and basking in the ionizing glow. Once again, skipping the details for time, basically she fought the dragon, tamed it, and graciously accepted the fealty oaths of the Tong marauders. So now she's the lord of a small but growing host. She's camped up there, gathering champions to her banner in preparation for lots of fun games of Warhammer the Old World, I guess. So that's the story of Valkadi, and of my entire Warriors of Chaos army, actually. If you've been following me, you'll know that I'm working on a project where I convert and kitbash all the units from the book for each Mark of Chaos. I wanted to reimagine what they could look like if they were from all different parts of the world and worshipped all the different gods. But Valkadi is the glue that holds them all together. I'll post a link in the description where you can find my blog post where I flesh out her story a lot more. So anyway, since she's up in the far north, I thought I'd go with a wintry ice base for her. This is a rocky coastal outcropping jutting out into the frozen sea. Or maybe she's swooping in and making landfall on the northern coast of the Empire in the dead of winter, when their guard is down. I built up the back of the base, leaving the front as low as possible so I could do a resin pour to simulate ice. I sculpted these chunks of milliput to look like rocks angling outward towards the sea, at a similar angle to the main rock feature. And then I added some smaller rock details. Because this is Warhammer, I added some skull piles on the beach and under the ice, and that made me think it would look pretty cool if I added some half-submerged corpses into the ice too. So here's what I ended up with, and here's how she's going to stand on the base, I hope. So now it's finally time to paint. I primed everything black and then I started with the ice field. So I saw this really cool tutorial by Goblin's Den where he showed how to make ice bases, so that's what I'm going for. I started by doing a sloppy gradient from dark blue to turquoise to sky blue and finally to white. I kept the edges really rough and splotchy to make it feel more organic. Next I base coated the ground in dark reddish brown and the rocks in medium gray, and after that I dry brushed some brighter midtones onto the rock. Then I mixed a bit of ice yellow to that gray for some highlights. Next, I distractedly washed the rocks with Known Oil as I watched Miscast Trent's new video. At the time of this recording, he was doing a series on a side channel where he's posting a hobby vlog every day, and on the first day that he misses a video, he's going to delete everything from the channel. I don't know if he'll still be going when this video comes out, but you should look into it and see if he's still going because it's a really cool project. I started to do some frost and that green slime that you see on rocks at the beach, but I stopped because I know I'm going to use snow effects later anyway. Honestly, I was just avoiding having to start on the dragon because I was still nervous about it. But I can't put it off any longer. Or wait, yes I can. It's time to waffle for a little while about whether to put a sorcerer on the base. Maybe he's summoning her. No, it doesn't matter. I'm in a time crunch. I told you that this was for a competition, but did I mention that I procrastinated for months? And I only worked on her in the last week of the competition. So yeah, I'm rushing this. So I love the original black and off-white scheme of Dorgar, but I wanted to introduce a slight amount of blue to the black, just so it doesn't feel too monochromatic. I dry brushed this on everywhere to get a nice base going. And then I dry brushed a slightly lighter blue-gray to pick out the details. And it turned out way too blue. All my fears were coming true. But after a mild panic attack, I moved on to the soft underbelly, just to see if I liked the blue when contrasted with the pale skin. Because I knew I could fix the blue later. And it looks like I forgot to film myself fixing it, but basically I just used gray to dry brush the details and lighten them up even further. And then I used contrast black Templar to darken the entire thing down to almost black, but it still has some slight blue tone in the shadows. Next I agraxed the tan bits. I love how that's a verb now. Agraxed. And then I washed the deepest recesses of the soft skin with a reddish purple wash. I discovered this color while working on my Chaos spawn from Mordheim. Contrast Flesh Terror's red was too red, and Druchii Violet was too violet, so I just mixed them together and water them down. And that gave me a nice, natural pinkish wash. By the way, this tan color that I'm highlighting with now is a mix of flat earth and a neutral gray to desaturate it. At this point, I still wasn't sure whether I liked the overall scheme. And I'm not just talking about my execution of it, but the color scheme itself. It didn't really seem sinister enough. But I decided to just trust the process and push forward. Isn't it crazy how much a tight deadline can really force you to overcome your fears? I knew I wanted to make the wing membranes warmer, but I didn't know yet whether they should be reddish or if I want them to end up being the same pale skin tone as the belly. But either way, I had to base them in whole red first. There was no reason to stop my forward momentum. I could agonize over that decision as I base coated all the metal bits. So I base coated all the metal bits. And then I started highlighting the leather. So I usually use Contrast Wildwood as a dark wash on all my leather. So I like to do a really bold contrasty highlight to make sure that they show through the heavy wash at the end. Speaking of washes, I did a bit of a recess wash with Nuln Oil in the dark scales, which really helped make him look more sinister. While I was doing that, I also washed all the metals with Nuln Oil and Agrax Earthshade. One thing I'm learning while doing a model this big and with this many different parts is, yeah, it's really scary when I hit a section I've never done before, but even if I don't know how I'm going to do it, I usually know what the first step is, so I just do that. And by the time I finish the first steps, my mind has already worked out the next steps on its own. So in that spirit, I dry brushed the wings with purple, and then I did a brighter dry brush with some red mixed in. At this point, I still didn't know whether I was going to do red wings or pale wings, but either way, I knew they needed this base coat. So instead of sitting around trying to visualize it or looking up a million examples of other people's work, I just went for it. Gathering references is crucial, but at some point you've stopped researching and now you're just procrastinating. And the reason you can't find that example of the exact thing you want to make is because you haven't made it yet. As I was doing the purple recess wash on the wings, something clicked, and I knew I wasn't going to do the pale skin tone on the membranes. It was perfect for the project as it was. Valkati herself was looking a little too knight in shining armor at this point, so I darkened down her armor panels with contrast black Templar. So now it was time for weathering. I added a pale blue verdigris to all the gold parts, and lightly applied dirty down rust to all the steel. And then I reactivated the rust with some water and swooshed it all around to help it flow into the recesses more. After all that, I took the original steel color and picked out some edges and added some scratches and damage to the dark rusty metal. The last thing to do was to finish the base. So I did my resin pour, and it took forever to cure. I was actually doing this on the day that the competition was supposed to be ending, so I had to move really fast, and this little UV flashlight was just not cutting it. So I broke out the big guns. I propped it up in my curing machine for 3D printing. Once it was hard, I scratched the surface up with some sanding sticks and even the hobby knife. The subtle separation between the scratches and the blue undercoat really give it a nice sense of depth, especially in person. Next, I painted on a really thin watery layer of sky blue and worked it up towards pure white. This simulates the frost on the surface of the ice and also really enhances the depth, especially if you leave it unscratched and unpainted in some places, so that you can see down into the depth. So now, all that was left to do was glue her to the base. For some extra support, I added these little paper clips in her feet to help her pin her to the rock. Now that she was mounted to the base, the vision finally clicked for me. Up until this moment, I was still unsure if I would like it, but the competition deadline and the fact that she was just lying face down, half modeled and unpainted in my display cabinet for years really made me realize that I just want it done and behind me. I wasn't expecting to end up loving the results, but in the end, I really do. I think she's a worthy centerpiece to lead my army. And as far as the competition, I actually won. I was genuinely surprised because there were a bunch of really cool entries. Check the description for links to all of them. I procrastinated on her so much and almost gave up trying to hit the deadline so many times. But ironically, I think procrastinating and giving myself only a week to work on her is what caused her to turn out so good. Like always, I learned a lot during the process with her. But this time though, it wasn't new techniques that I learned. It was more like I learned that the techniques that I already know will work on larger models. In other words, I should stop hiding behind doing research and just do the dang thing. I already have everything I need to paint the big scary models that are gathering dust in my cabinet. And chances are so do you. If you can dry brush and use washes and paint in the lines at least 65% of the time, you can paint your big models too. In fact, I was so inspired by this project that I bought my first resin bust. I'm excited to try this out because it reminds me of Valkati. It could be like a portrait of her to put in my display cabinet next to my army. Anyway, if you want to see how this turns out, stay tuned. Subscribe to the channel to make sure you don't miss it. And as you can see, I'm back on my Chaos Warriors project, so I've got a ton of updates on that coming. And lastly, I want to try out adding some interaction to these videos. So leave a comment or a question in the comment section, and I'll read and answer a few of them in the future videos. As always, links to any artists I may have mentioned will be down in the description, as well as a link to my Instagram where you can check out all of my work and see the progress on things weeks before they end up in my videos. Anyway, like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.